form many important links to governments and industry decision makers. Welcome, Richard, and thank you for taking the time to make this presentation. Over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. As I said, nice to see some familiar faces. And just for a bit of background, what I've been doing over the last little while, I was in this role for about 8 or 9 years, actually, prior to having a little go at running the NRL team and club, etc., which was about a year, and I was a third CEO in about 12 months. So running football clubs in the NRL is a bit different to running a industry association with captains of industry, but that's another story, and I'll talk to you all over a drink maybe one day about that. But also recently what I've been doing is working hand in glove with an owner in North Queensland on a resort there, so regional property, improving his property, and he's been taking advantage of COVID, I'd have to say. In fact, I just saw the figures for the last month where it closed out at 87% and average rate of $310. So with F&B producing as much revenue as the accommodation, so an even split of F&B to accommodation. So it's sort of a little $13 million property on North Queensland, taking advantage of what is a horrible situation that is COVID. They're a great example of a property that is in a regional spot that's in Queensland that's harnessed the intrastate travel that has not travelled to Bali or Thailand or Fiji. So a lot of Australians looking for that experience, and I've been involved firsthand with that property, and I still am involved in that property. But it brings me to sort of where I am today, which is I've only been a month back into the association, the industry association that represents the accommodation sector. And I'm proud to be asked back because we're steering it through the next phase, which is the phase of an amalgamation with the Australian Hotel Association. And I've been working on that as well for the last 15 months. And that's a very long, drawn out process, only because of the regulatory environment that we're in. And but the idea is I went back in about 16 months ago to say, I think this is a really good idea to integrate and have a strong single voice for what an industry that is suffering through COVID. COVID's provided a good excuse to do this, and it's happening. And I'm really pleased. The inaugural board's already been nominated, and that's going to formally happen probably next June. And informally over the next 6 months, you're seeing a lot more joint submissions, joint events, a lot of joint things. So what I'm really proud about, and looking at it from the outside through this pandemic that I've seen, is that I've never heard tourism talked about so much. And obviously it's in crisis, but you have to have a voice and you have to be heard. And from the Prime Minister down, they've all been talking about what is tourism and what does it mean. And tourism is, up until 2019 was $152 billion input into the GDP. June to July it was more like 42 billion, so it's taken a massive hit, $100 billion hit and more. But thankfully governments are very aware of what's been happening, and that's due to mostly industry bodies like the Accommodation Association telling them. And it's important to sing the message. It's important to be there. And what has happened during the pandemic, and since I was last in charge, is that we've increased our staffing. So we've actually got a dedicated government resource. We've got a dedicated public relations company who's looking after us. So there's a lot of dedicated resources that have been able to, I guess, assist us tell that story. But I wouldn't mind just quickly sharing a presentation, if I could, of just where I guess, the state of the industry and what are we doing about it. It's as simple as that. I like to keep things very simple, untechnical, but we might get Margot to just go up to the first page there first, Margot, if you could. And then, it's dropped down to the second page. So we got some STR data, which some of you may or may not have seen. We shared this in a members forum not long ago, but effectively what that's saying with Sydney and Melbourne and the Gold Coast, and doesn't have Brisbane on there, but it's Eastern Seaboard, is that weekends are the only time we're really seeing activity in those areas. That includes, you can see it in the bottom, Blue Mountains, Central Coast, Southern Highlands and Wollongong. And then school holidays have been a factor as well as terms of peak occupancy. But the rest of it is, you know, we're hovering around that 40% mark as an industry. So, and then the cities themselves, Sydney and Melbourne, are more in crisis. They're languishing down as low as sort of 10% occupancy. So what, from a very helicopter level at the moment, you know, the state of the industry is that regions are doing better than the cities, which you probably all remember on this call 5 years ago. That would be in the converse, where the cities were firing and regions weren't doing as well, but were still doing okay. But it's quite the opposite now. The cities are the one who are in crisis and need to pull themselves out. And you can see that on the right-hand side, 17th of January, you know, Sydney, Melbourne languishing around about 5% occupancy across the board. So that's a pretty unhealthy chart, but it also gives an insight to us all that weekends are okay, and so that's leisure, but there is no corporate business, there is no group business, there is no inbound business. So that's just where it is. Next slide, thanks, Margo. And that's sort of more detail around the way that's been tracking, and it's been a bit of a sad old chart. Having said that, we're starting to see some uptick, and we're a bit more confident. And I'm not an analyst, but I listen to the analysts who put this together, and we use STR, so I give them credit, and also Deloitte, who help us, you know, paint the picture. And we need to, you know, look at this, and if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, to be able to tell politicians, well, this is the state of play of the industry. Next slide, please, Margo. What the, I guess, interesting part is, what do we think about recovery? Because we've seen, you know, you can look over your shoulder, and that's easy to do, but where you've been, but what about going forward? And Deloitte have looked at forecast models of how long this is going to take to recover back to pre-COVID levels. And you can see there's sort of three scenarios: blue's sort of the best scenario, green's sort of the worst scenario, and the dotted ones are something in the middle. And we're probably following the one in the middle, which takes us through to 2022, 23 before we reach pre-COVID levels of occupancy again. And that's domestic and international. With the differential between domestic and international is that domestic's held up much better than international, of course, because there has been no international. But there've been only 17% downturn in trips in domestic versus a massive downturn in international. So that's sort of recovery, where we're heading. And what are we doing about it? Next slide, thanks, Margo. Is we've come up with these priority tasks for government, and these are on foot. And you would have seen a lot of this transpiring, these priority asks, and most of the work that we're doing right now is state government, because as COVID has shown, the sovereignty of the states versus the federal government, a lot of this belongs to the state governments who make those decisions. And you know, you can be your own judge on which states have been performed better and worse over this pandemic. I've definitely got a view of it, but we've been daily talking to government, and we basically participate in every activity we can with them as far as engagement. And we've been pushing the agenda around, particularly the support vouchers, JobKeeper, all these important pieces that have helped us survive through what has been a once in a lifetime pandemic. The real crisis that I see and coming into this role going forward over the next 12 months, and it was tapping us on the shoulder prior to it, is going to be the employment. It's trying to find people, and I've, as I said, I've experienced it myself up in North Queensland, particularly around chefs and even frontline housekeepers, room attendants. That's really tough at the moment. And we want to have, and we're having grown-up conversations around non-skilled immigration. What Australia's been very good at is skilled migration, but we've been pretty poor at unskilled migration. And we're pushing that agenda with the government, and basically looking for solutions, because we've lost, and we're doing a survey on this at the moment, but there looks like something like 300,000 people out of the industry. and they've gone into health and other places where they've had a more of a sure landing. So we see this as I'm actually labelled a crisis, the employment crisis over the next 12 months. So that's been the focus of the National Board of the Accommodation Association, interacting with government. That is going to be an absolute priority. We formed an academy last year. You may have heard about it, but it's tasked with finding solutions and to attracting people to our industry. We've had a few black eyes through this pandemic, and when I say that, things like quarantine hotel, those type of programs haven't hurt us. In fact, that's been measured that around 36% of people don't feel safe in hotels at the moment. That a survey that was recently done, and that was a lot to do with those quarantine hotels and whether or not they were safe, and are they safe now? And there's a lot of work being done around that. And one of the things I've seen, a very impassioned video and testimonial around how our hotels sort of rescued Australia and rescued Australians coming home. We put ourselves on the front line as an industry to make sure that people could actually come back into the country in quarantine. And we put up our assets, we put up our staff, and I think that needs to be recognised. And we will be hammering that home with government that all that quarantine wouldn't have happened without us, without this industry, and it shouldn't be forgotten. It's virtually like being in a war time scenario. They commandeered hotels to quarantine people. So we should be respected for that, and we need to have the recognition and the support. At the moment, we're fighting with governments around fixing those properties up after they, and we use the using the tennis players in Melbourne as an example, where they were training in the hotel rooms, smashing up tennis balls into the walls and that sort of thing. So but that quarantine program wouldn't have happened to our industry. It must be recognised, and I think Qantas do a very good job of that, and that advocacy. So we'll be driving that home. The other big thing is about driving demand growth, and that's about working with Destination New South Wales and all the other agencies across the country to have a very healthy budget to make sure they've got a program of events that fill gaps and drive customers into whether it's the CBDs or regional areas. We believe that's a huge piece of the puzzle to make sure that there's demand drivers to drive people around the country, and they're interested in staying in Australia. We think 30% of people used to go overseas. That's the number they seem to be purporting, is that will stay in the country and never travel again, but they will travel domestically. So I think that we've got some green shoots on what is what has been a tough, set of circumstances following the bushfires that we can use. Next slide, thanks, Margaret. The next one is a little technical, but the backbench mobilisation campaign. This is basically where we've looked at all the sitting seats and sitting members around Australia, and what we're doing is campaigning where there's a marginal seat and making sure those people understand the importance of our industry and from their local members. So effectively, we're providing information back to our local motels, hotels, to write a letter, and we've got it all formed up where there's a marginal seat that we will actually influence. We want to influence those decision makers to support this industry, and that there's votes in it, because at the end of the day, governments only listen when there's votes. So we have invested and spent a lot of time, and this is a big program of ours, is to make sure that we're hitting the right people when it comes to the election, and that's well and truly in train. And we'll, as a lead up to the federal budget and the federal election, we'll be sending more and more letters. So make sure you're engaging with us on that, because particularly motels in regional places are very, very important voices in politics, because they actually employ people. It's a big industry and it provides jobs. So keep an eye on that one, and we'll let you know how that goes as we go and hit the. We normally hit the ministers. Now we're hitting the backbenches and marginal seats. So very interesting sort of angle of attack, but it's been a policy that was endorsed about 6 months ago, and I really like it. Next slide, thanks, Margot. I keep on going to hit my little button to move it on. I think that's the that's just our people who are supporting us. And next slide, thanks, Margot. And lastly, you know, we want everyone to be part of this big push, and so membership's important to us because it helps us do what we do. So that's probably just a presentation there, Charlie, and happy to take questions. And there's a lot more that we're doing, but in the time frame I've got, that's probably all I can tell you. And as I said, my feet are just fresh under the desk, but I'm pretty aware of what's going on, and happy to answer any questions if I can.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I was very interested to hear your attack on the marginal seats. Just here in our own situation, we've had a marginal member stay with us, didn't even bother to come into the office and say, how are you going, what's happening, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's the sort of thing you're fighting.
Was he a local member?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's shame on him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But we've got to make sure those people know that this industry, you know, needs the support. I guess what we're calling it, that COVID will have a long shadow. It's not an instant fix. We do know that there's some operators probably doing a little bit better than others, but at the same time, we can't be forgotten about. We have to be a priority industry is what we're saying. That's our objective, is to make sure that we're a priority industry. The airlines, for instance, are a priority industry for the governments, but accommodation isn't. And we want that status. So, because we believe we earned it. So we're going to fight for that. And we want everyone to, you know, push the button on it and help us. So that's really important to, once you recognise as those critical industries, there is, it's really laying out what's there as far as help, because you may all know that Qantas, for instance, got special dispensation to keep all their employees. They're all employed through us, the taxpayers, in readiness for the flights to start up again, because it's sort of 8 to 11 week program to get people back up in the air. So they've been supported. We need similar support, and we asking for it. We don't ask for direct support. What we ask for is demand drivers. Do not cut budgets, for instance, when it comes to marketing. Don't cut budgets when it comes to state events. You know, double up, double down. Make sure that, you know, events are king again. People need to move around the country. Businesses need confidence, and a lot of it's got to do with consumer sentiment. A lot of it's got to do with, as soon as someone says something positive, and I've seen it myself, you know, people start mobilising once they get a taste or a sniff that it's good. So consumer sentiment's really important. The right positive messages out there. We need to do it as well as an industry, but we need to get governments to do it.
On that, Richard, I know when you were in charge of the AAoA last time round, you were quite outspoken with regards to the OTAs, which is fantastic, and you'd fight the fight with them, and everyone in budget and around Australia, especially regional, absolutely loved you for it.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And the taxes that they avoid, and all of that.
Yeah, no, I think we spent a lot of time with the ATO, a lot of time with, in fact, BDO gave us a lot of advice. So we took it to them. I actually walked into their offices, and so yeah, no, I'm very passionate about that. And by the way, congratulations that you guys really have carried that mantle on. I've seen on your website that, you know, you have the right messages with Book and Save and Book Direct with an Australian business. I love all that messaging. It's really important.
Thank you,
Richard. It's Steve here. When we tell our guests that if they book offline, we would give them a discount, and they say, oh, and then we let them know that the OTAs aren't paying taxes, not even GST. And quite often they are surprised about that, especially GST, because, you know, a lot of national companies do get tax rebates.
Yep.
But when it comes to GST, which should really be poured back into our industry throughout Australia.
Yeah, I'm just making note of that, Steve, because yeah, I'm aware of that, but it, you know, there probably needs to be a bit of a campaign there, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
It's very much something that we're quite passionate about with regards to the OTAs paying the proper taxes, fees, everything like that they should. And we're going to keep doing that fight as well. We just love it if the AAoAs and yourself particularly is going to keep on that as well.
No, happy to do that, Chris. Noted, and you know, I love that that particular bit. So love
Oh, yeah.
taking the fight onto these
Richard?
bullies.
One thing that is a bit of a target for me also is the state tourism bodies are actually using booking.com, etc., rather than an Australian-based booking engine for all of their activities, accommodation, experiences, etc. And I find that a bit of a juxtaposition in the fact that, you know, we're supporting local, book direct, all those sorts of things, but we're not. We're going to use booking.com's engine. And do you
Pay no taxes.
Yeah, I think
it's like,
that came up
maybe-
a little bit, Margot, in the last few months. I was in the job last time, and obviously let them know my objection to it. Their argument back to me was the volume of business that they generate. They were interested in playing with them, you know, and I said, well, you know, that's okay. It's like playing on the highway, you know, it's really busy, but you're going to get run over. And I said, no, that's the problem. And I think most taxpayers don't want to have their, you know, have this situation that's evolved, and it should be Australia first. So I'll put that back on my my list. But you know, I got to say, there's a lot of issues. There's a big menu, and I think, you know, what I've seen absolutely happen over the last month in the association is a full deck of just trying to interpret health orders at the moment, trying to get the source of truth to our members to make sure they understand, you know, what is required, and it's a daily thing. And then our guys are absolutely snowballed with it all. And just trying to, and then going back and forth to sort of say, what is this? Can you please clarify that piece? And I think some of the agenda items like you're talking about here, you know, probably have gone to the back burner, and probably, you know, unfortunate, but at the moment, I got to say they're probably not a priority, but they will be again, and I'll take it up. But we're just going through this, what I call a transition phase now, coming out of this lockdowns of the poor people in New South Wales and Victoria have been in, and we're going into this new phase of life where I see high levels of compliance and cost. I walked through the city yesterday for the first time in Sydney. I couldn't believe every shop had a security guard on the front door, you know, and so the cost of compliance for everybody to check this and check that is, you know, it's going to break businesses, because you can't sustain people just. I actually came home and said to my wife yesterday, I think I'm going to find a public company who does security companies, because I think they're going to make a lot of money, because they, you know, just trying to have a security guard on every single retail place. And we're not police. Hoteliers aren't police. We actually welcome guests, and I think that's the message I've been sort of saying to them. And having known that place up in Queensland where the complacency rules in Queensland. I don't know if any of you are from Queensland, but complacency absolutely rules on vaccinations, and no one wants to get it unless they have to, unless there's a burning bridge, which Victorians and New South Welshmen had a burning bridge. But you know, it's the only way out of this thing. So, but it's been the absolute priority, and as I said, we've been just busy interacting with state governments, and I don't like playing with state governments, to be honest. I like playing with the federal government. You get more things done, but the way that this pandemic has really demonstrated is Australia is a federation of states, and they've got their own sovereignty. So we've had to sort of go back into the trenches with all the states and get down and dirty about all these things that they're doing. So at the end of the day, we're going to be very busy dealing with states.
Yeah, Richard, we in South Australia are very nervous when they open up the borders to Victorians and New South Wales, because our government hasn't really come out and said what they're going to do. If, for example, I have a guest here and prove positive, what happens to my motel when I've got most probably 50 to 70% of it full of contractors? Do I get closed down? And no one is talking at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve, because I can't speak on behalf of South Australia. This came up in Victoria. One of the things with accommodation, it's quite unique in that we're deemed as an emergency supply because of, you know, domestic violence, all sort of thing, as a shelter, you know. So
yeah.
And as far as unvaccinated people, you can actually take them in Victoria into accommodation because it's deemed emergency. But that's all a state by state thing. I've made a note of that because I want to know what the situation is there. You're concerned by the sound of it of non-vaxxed and what about staffing, Steve? Have you got any orders on that yet in South Oz?
Not as yet.
Yeah.
Not as yet. No.
So you're a bit behind on the game plan.
Well, we've been good people. We've been.
Yeah, I know.
We've been free.
But don't worry, mate. It's coming though. I tell you. I've got a
Yeah, I
plan
know.
for it. So I've got a good mate down there in the AHA, Ian Horn, and who I'll have a chat with him. And I got to say, that's what we're doing at the moment. We're talking amongst ourselves and then to government to get our messaging right, so that we can get the right message back out to you guys, and also push your case forward. That's what it's all about for us.
Yep. Is it right that I've got a mate who's in Shell Harbour, and if they got to clean the whole motel, it's a 20 grand type of figure?
Defogging and all that sort of thing. Yeah,
that's right.
I don't have the number on top of my head, but I imagine it's a very exhaustive process, and the companies who are doing it aren't discounting.
Yeah, I bet. Well, that's how I feel over here too.
Yeah, I'm going to I'll take up your see where that plan's at, Steve. I'm going to look into that, give that to the guys to check it out.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've still got you. Noel helped us out with the new pay increases from the 1st of November. Going through Fair Works, it was a bit of a headache trying to work out what they're really talking about. But Noel put it all together for us. Thank you.
Yeah, he cuts out all the BS and gets a very plain language to it. So please make use of him. He's very good. And I'm sorry about the increase because it's bigger than what it should have been. You know, I think it was 2.6?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the biggest increase for a while, and it seems counterproductive through a crisis. But I'm sure the next one will be better. But yeah, all the wage sheets, that compliance stuff is really important, that your property is paying the right amounts, and they're still auditing, but the caseload of fair work has dropped to about half of unfair dismissals. We did some study on it the other day, and even from our experience, Noel's experience, I checked with the AHA, it's the caseloads have halved because people have been stood down, and also I think staff have a better understanding of businesses now that we suffer just like everybody else. We have to suffer through things and pull levers that we don't want to necessarily have to pull. But I think there might be a bit more respect for us. The problem is we got to find more staff again. That's going to be. Is that everyone on the line there? That'd be my question back to you. Is staffing going to be your biggest issue over the next 12 months?
Only if mine leave, but I had staff painting and all sorts of things just so I can keep cooks and kitchen hands. They were willing, so it worked out well for me and Lee. Yeah, so, and we ended up with a number of infrastructure jobs around, so that came in around about July, August last year, and we've been very busy since. Yeah, so yeah, that's the way I kept my staff.
What about Charlie? Charlie, can you talk on behalf of the businesses? Is that a priority item, or?
It seems to be. I think we've lost a lot of people to other organisations, other industries, and going forward, it's certainly going to be a big problem. Especially when you've had people, you've trained them up, and they've just gone, and it's just so difficult to even find one. That some of the incentives the government gave these people were just so far over the top that it's just not worth them going back to work, obviously.
Yeah.
And they've still got that sort of, I guess, those sort of ideas in their head. Yeah.
Yeah, that's led to the complacency as well. The other thing that I experienced firsthand with North Queensland was one thing led into another. When you've got a busy place like I was up at Airlie Beach, which is in near Mackay, it was a housing crisis as well, because what had happened is a high volume tourism centre like that. Every home was turned into an Airbnb. Then your staff came. In fact, it was the worst place in Queensland to rent because there was just nothing available. In fact, when I looked at one stage, there were two places for rent. One I wouldn't put a dog in, and the second one I wouldn't put the dog's fleas into it. And you know, so, but what I end up having to do is I've had to rent. The company that I was with was renting accommodation whenever they came up to put staff in, because the staff couldn't find accommodation and they weren't prepared to do a 6-month lease, some of them as well, because they've only got 3-month visas and this sort of stuff. So we've had to change the way we do things in that place whereby we had to house people, which we've never had to do before. And we're paying for that plus a 20% sort of increase in wages to attract them, like chefs and that sort of thing, just to get a brigade of people to pump out the, you know, the food. So all this stuff I've experienced firsthand. That's one of the arguments I was running to prior to this, was just all about, you know, the accommodation, permanent accommodation that's gone into short-term letting. This is now manifested into a housing crisis in places where you've got high tourism, because you can't actually house anyone. You can't actually get staff into the area like Byron Bay or Airlie Beach, because there's nothing left, because everything's left has gone onto Airbnb to meet demand for the Australian you know, domestic tourism, because they can't get overseas, so they're going to these places, and it's caused the housing crisis. So that's already been put on the agenda, and I've made sure of it. So one thing leads to another, and I guess if they'd listened to start with and moderated and regulated, and they have in some jurisdictions, the short-term rentals, that we wouldn't have these issues. But you know, now we're getting these issues.
Yeah, Airbnb's become just the biggest problem as the OTAs now, isn't it? So for that reason, yeah, it's the same here in our area. It's just no accommodation available, and they've all gone to the short-term accommodation. Yeah, and it goes right back to councils, I think, because they've got to make the rulings as to how they allow these things too. So it's all levels of government involved in that one.
No, and that's LGAs, a lot of it, and but it starts at state government. But a good story I've got is with we employed a French chef there, and he hadn't been living with his partner for 5 months because their house had been taken over to holiday rental. They were living in separate houses. And, you know, so I tell people, you know, can you imagine a French chef after 5 months not being with his girlfriend? He's very cranky, you know, and crankier than normal. So, I mean, it's a good story.
One thing, Richard, that we've been working on is the ratchet clauses. I'm not sure if you've seen Dr. Joe McGurr's video or speech or anything like that in Parliament. The ratchet clauses in New South Wales.
Oh, yes, I saw that, yes.
Yeah, we've been working closely with Dr. Joe there about getting them removed. Have you heard any whispers with regards to that?
Yeah, I did. I got a call from a guy who had some property in Cairns about that. The Property Council was handling that, I understood, and they've sort of, I understand they've waved the white flag on it. That they think that's, you know, the ratchet clauses, they got rid of it in retail, as I understand.
Yep.
And this is a lingering issue that's still with leases on motels, the ratchet clauses.
Yeah, every state has moved over to the retail sector except for New South Wales. So we've just been approaching Dr. Joe, independent, always good to deal with.
Yes, I did. I'm trying to think who called me about this very early on, but I've given that issue to the State Advisory Committee in Queensland, Mark Hodges, the chair, and they've got that as an agenda item to prosecute. And so, yes, we've got that one on our list, and I can't give you a definitive answer right now, but it's something we would definitely bring up with government.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anything else?
Any other questions from anybody?
No? Well, thank you very much for everyone's support. We can't do it without you. We need members. We need to make sure that we've got a bright future. So thank you for supporting us. Thanks for you know, the opportunity to speak to you today too, Charlie, and Chris and Margot and everyone else. So and as I said, as time goes on, I'll get a bit more experienced and understand it. But drop me a line anytime, and I'll do my best to answer it.
Thanks, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard. It's good to see you.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and we'll share the video around. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
See you later.